Nays de la Ca, my name is Jocelyn. I am 34 years old, and today my mother banned me from my own sister's engagement dinner because I was too much of an embarrassment to our family. She texted me not to come, claiming the head count was strictly final and that my presence would humiliate them in front of her future in-laws. So I poured myself a glass of wine and stayed in my penthouse. What she did not know was that she was hosting her fancy dinner inside the very private club I secretly owned. Before I tell you how her perfect night turned into a $42,000 nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought you were nothing. The afternoon sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan penthouse when my phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. I was in the middle of reviewing architectural blueprints for the newest location of Aura Estates, my luxury hospitality and private club empire. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up with a message from my mother, Patricia. I opened the text and read the words she had carefully typed to inflict maximum damage. Do not come tonight. The head count is final. Devon's family is very high society, and I will not have you embarrassing us by talking about your little catering gigs. Stay home. I stared at the screen for a long moment. A younger version of me might have cried. A younger version of me might have called her begging to be included, promising to sit quietly in the corner and speak only when spoken to. But I was no longer the scared 20-year-old girl they had cut off financially for refusing to go to medical school. When I dropped out of their approved life path to work in the hospitality industry, my father Richard told me I was dead to him. My mother told her country club friends that I was suffering from mental health issues to explain away my absence. For 14 years, they truly believed I was barely scraping by as a low-level event coordinator. They never bothered to check on me. They never asked for the name of my business. I set my wine glass down and typed a single word in reply. Understood. I hit send and tossed the phone back onto the blueprints. There was no pain left in my chest regarding my family, only a cold clinical understanding of who they were. My sister Vanessa was 29 years old and the undisputed golden child. She was spoiled, manipulative, and absolutely desperate to secure her marriage into high society. Her fiancé Devon was a brilliant African-American venture capitalist. He was everything my parents worshipped: wealthy, respected, and highly connected. More importantly, Devon's parents, Lawrence and Beatrice, were the definition of old money elite. Lawrence was a real estate mogul who valued integrity above all else. Beatrice was known for her philanthropic work and her absolute disdain for pretentious fake people. My mother was terrified of them. She was twisting herself into knots trying to project an image of massive wealth to impress Lawrence and Beatrice, completely ignoring the fact that my father's logistics company was secretly drowning in massive debt. The heavy oak doors of my home office swung open. Felix, my executive director and right-hand man, stepped into the room. Felix was fiercely loyal, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, and one of the few people who knew the entire truth about my family. He held a glowing iPad in his hand and wore a sharp, knowing smile. "Boss, we have a slight situation at the flagship property," Felix said, walking over to my desk. I leaned back in my chair. "Tell me everything." "It is about the VIP reservation at the Obsidian Room tonight," he continued. "The engagement dinner for your sister. They arrived 15 minutes ago." The Obsidian Room was the crown jewel of Aura Estates. It was the most exclusive private dining club in New York City. The wait list was 8 months long. You could not bribe your way in. You had to be invited. My mother had spent weeks leveraging my father's failing company name just to snatch up a last-minute cancellation spot. I had personally approved her reservation behind the scenes, strictly for my own amusement. "How is the dinner going so far?" I asked, picking up my wine glass again. Felix tapped the screen of his iPad, pulling up the live digital ledger for their private dining suite. Your mother is currently putting on quite the show for her future in-laws. She just demanded the sommelier bring out 4 bottles of the 1990 vintage Dom Perignon. She explicitly told the staff that price is no object when celebrating her perfect daughter. I raised an eyebrow. 4 bottles of the 1990 vintage. That alone was going to cost her a small fortune. My father did not have that kind of liquid cash available. His corporate credit cards were hanging by a thread. Felix looked at me, his finger hovering over the screen. She is throwing their weight around, treating our waitstaff like personal servants. Should I step in and comp the champagne? As a professional courtesy from the owner, I looked out the window at the sprawling city skyline. I thought about the text message sitting on my phone. I thought about the 14 years of being called a failure, a disappointment, and an embarrassment. I thought about my mother trying to impress Devon's incredibly genuine and honest parents with money she did not have. I turned back to Felix and offered him a cold, sharp smirk. "No," I said smoothly. "Let her run the tab. She wants to play the billionaire socialite tonight, so let her pay the billionaire price. Do not comp a single napkin. She does not know she is sitting in my restaurant, and I want to see exactly how far she is willing to dig her own grave." Felix returned my smirk and locked the iPad screen. "Understood, boss. I will instruct the staff to offer her our most expensive caviar menu next." "Perfect," I replied. "Keep your phone on loud, Felix. I have a feeling tonight is going to get very interesting." 2 hours slipped by in perfect, uninterrupted peace. I sat on my velvet sofa, watching the city lights flicker to life across the Manhattan skyline. My architectural blueprints were neatly stacked away, and my glass of wine was nearly empty. Downstairs, 30 floors below me, in the exclusive dining room of my club, my family was enjoying their wildly expensive charade. I imagined my mother Patricia holding court, laughing loudly and pretending she belonged among the city's true elite. I was just deciding whether to pour another glass when my phone shattered the silence. The screen flashed with my sister's name. Vanessa. I let it ring 3 times before I casually swiped to answer. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "How could you do this to us?" Vanessa screamed through the speaker. Her voice was shrill and echoing with absolute panic. "You did this on purpose. You planned this just to humiliate me on the most important night of my life." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. "Do what exactly, Vanessa?" "I am sitting alone in my apartment miles away from your dinner exactly as our mother commanded. I have not lifted a single finger to ruin your evening. Do not play dumb with me," she shrieked, her breath hitching as if she had been crying. "I am hiding in the restroom right now because the entire private dining suite has turned into a nightmare. You sabotaged my engagement." I leaned back against the sofa cushions. "Calm down and use your words, Vanessa. What exactly happened?" Through her frantic gasps, the story tumbled out. The dinner had been going flawlessly. Patricia had charmed Devon and his parents. They had consumed the expensive caviar Felix sent out. They had finished the vintage champagne. The mood was celebratory and light. Devon's father, Lawrence, had been speaking about his real estate ventures. Lawrence was a man of strict principles, a highly respected African-American mogul who built his empire on honesty and integrity. He despised pretentiousness. According to Vanessa, Lawrence had reached into his leather briefcase to pull out a document. Instead of business papers, he pulled out the newest edition of Manhattan Elite magazine. He placed it directly in the center of the white linen tablecloth. "Your face is on the cover," Vanessa wailed. "Your stupid, smug face taking up the entire page." I smiled to myself. I knew the magazine was running a feature on my hospitality empire this month, but the publication date had clearly been bumped up. It was a delightful coincidence. "And what is the problem with that?" I asked smoothly. "The problem is what Mom told them about you," Vanessa hissed. "You know how Devon's family is. They value family above everything else." When they asked why my only sister was not at the rehearsal dinner, Mom panicked. She wanted to sound charitable but keep you away. So she lied. She told Lawrence and Beatrice that you were severely mentally unwell. She told them you were a jobless outcast living in a trailer park, completely dependent on Dad paying your rent. I actually laughed out loud. The sheer audacity of Patricia's lies never failed to amaze me. She told a billionaire real estate mogul that the owner of the very building they were dining in was a charity case. It gets worse, Vanessa cried. The headline on the magazine literally says, "The Hidden Queen of Luxury Jocelyn and Her Aura Estates Empire." Lawrence read it out loud. He looked at the magazine, then he looked at the gold-embossed menu on our table that says the Obsidian Room and Aura Estates property. He connected the dots instantly. He asked Mom why the highly successful CEO of the private club we are currently sitting in was excluded from a family celebration. I could picture the exact look on Lawrence's face. He was not a man who tolerated deception, and Beatrice Devon's mother was even sharper. "What did our mother say to that?" I asked, tracing the rim of my wine glass. She froze. Vanessa sobbed. She just sat there opening and closing her mouth. "Devon is looking at me like I am a stranger. Beatrice is glaring at Mom like she is garbage." The entire energy in the room shifted in a matter of seconds. "You have to come down here right now." I raised an eyebrow even though she could not see me. "Come down there. Why would I do that?" "Because you have to fix this," she demanded, her golden child entitlement bleeding through her panic. "You have to walk into that room and tell them the magazine is an exaggeration. Tell them you are just a figurehead or an event planner who got lucky. Tell them you were too sick to attend tonight, so Mom was just trying to protect your privacy. You have to pretend this is all a massive misunderstanding." I let her words hang in the air. She wanted me to walk into my own restaurant stand in front of my own staff and lie to powerful business tycoons just to protect the fragile ego of the mother who had thrown me away like garbage. "Vanessa," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "I spent the last 14 years building my empire from nothing. I washed dishes, I slept on kitchen floors, and I sacrificed everything to become who I am today. I am not going to diminish my life's work to save you from a lie you chose to participate in. Please, Jocelyn." Vanessa begged, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "You do not understand. Devon is furious. He hates liars. If you do not come down here and cover for us, he is going to call off the wedding. I know he will. Then maybe you should not have built your relationship on a foundation of deceit," I replied coldly. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner. I am hanging up now." "Wait!" Vanessa screamed so loud it made me pull the phone away from my ear. "You have to come. You do not understand what Mom is doing right now. She is backed into a corner and she is losing her mind." I paused. What is she doing? Vanessa was hyperventilating, her words tumbling over each other in sheer terror. "She is doubling down, Jocelyn. Lawrence demanded to know why we lied about your success. So Mom is spinning a brand new story to save face. She is telling them you are a criminal." "A criminal?" I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone. "Mom is telling them you stole the money from Dad to open this place." Vanessa dropped the bomb, her voice trembling. "She is telling Lawrence and Devon that you embezzled millions of dollars from Dad's logistics company. She is saying that is the real reason you were disowned, because you are a thief who robbed your own family blind to build your empire." The air in my penthouse suddenly felt perfectly still. Patricia was not just lying to save her social status anymore. She was actively trying to destroy my professional reputation in front of one of the most powerful venture capitalists in New York. I stood up from my sofa. The calm amusement I had felt all evening vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. "I will be there in 10 minutes, I said, and ended the call. I walked straight into my dressing room and bypassed the evening gowns. I did not need to look like a guest tonight. I needed to look like an owner. I pulled out a custom-tailored emerald green power suit. It was sharp, unapologetic, and radiated absolute authority. I paired it with gold stiletto heels and clasped a vintage Cartier watch around my wrist. If my mother wanted to paint me as a desperate, unhinged criminal, I was going to show her exactly what a real empire looked like. I stepped into my private elevator and keyed in the security code. The steel doors slid shut, and I descended 30 floors. The Obsidian Room occupied the entire ground level of my building, hidden securely behind a set of unmarked black brass doors. The moment I stepped out of the elevator and my heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the foyer, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The host immediately stood up straighter, nodding deeply. The bartenders at the onyx stone bar paused their mixing to offer respectful glances. The waitstaff carrying trays of champagne stepped aside, clearing a path for me. Felix was waiting near the entrance of the VIP corridor. He held a sleek black leather folder in his hands. "They are in the onyx suite at the end of the hall," Felix murmured, falling into step beside me. "Your mother has been pacing outside the room for the last 5 minutes. She looks like she is about to hyperventilate." "Perfect," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead. I turned the corner into the dimly lit, velvet-lined corridor. The jazz music from the main dining room faded into a sophisticated quiet. Halfway down the hall, I saw them, Patricia and Richard. They were standing outside the heavy mahogany doors of the private suite, whispering frantically to each other. When Patricia saw me approaching, the panic on her face instantly morphed into sheer rage. She marched toward me, her designer heels sinking into the plush carpet. Before I could even say a word, she lunged forward and grabbed my arm. Her perfectly manicured nails dug sharply through the silk of my sleeve. "You are going to walk in there and tell them that magazine is a fraud," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of fear and fury. "You are going to tell Lawrence and Beatrice that you paid a writer to make up that entire article because you are mentally unstable." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until the weight of my silence forced her to realize who held the power. "Take your hands off my suit," I said. My voice was dangerously low, carrying a chilling calm that made her immediately let go and take a step back. Richard stepped up to fill the space she left behind. He puffed out his chest, using the same booming, aggressive corporate voice he used to intimidate his employees. "Listen to your mother, Jocelyn," he demanded, pointing a thick finger in my face. "You have humiliated us enough. You dropped out of law school, you disgraced the family name, and now you are trying to ruin your sister's engagement just because you are jealous. You will go in there right now and admit that this CEO title is a complete fabrication." I looked at my father. He was sweating. The collar of his expensive dress shirt was damp and his eyes were wide with desperation. They were completely cornered by their own web of lies, and instead of taking accountability, they were trying to bully me into saving them. "And why exactly would I do that?" I asked, crossing my arms. "You told Devon's family that I embezzled millions of dollars from your logistics company to open this club. You called me a thief. You expect me to walk into my own restaurant and validate your psychotic lies. If you do not play along, I will sue you for defamation." Richard threatened, stepping even closer to try and tower over me. "I will drag you through the courts. I will hire the best lawyers in this city and expose you for the fraud you are until you have absolutely nothing left. Do you understand me?" I stared at him for a long, quiet moment. Then I smiled. "Sue me," I said smoothly. "With what money, Richard?" His face froze. The aggressive posture instantly cracked. "What did you just say?" I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing him to back up. "I asked how you plan to pay a legal team when you cannot even afford the commercial lease on your own warehouse. You missed your last 3 payments. Zenith Continental Bank froze your corporate accounts on Tuesday afternoon. You are drowning in debt, and you are trying to threaten me with money you do not have." Patricia gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. She looked at Richard in absolute horror. "Richard, what is she talking about? Are our accounts frozen?" Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. He had spent months hiding his financial ruin from his wife, maintaining the illusion of immense wealth so she could play the high society socialite. And I had just ripped the blindfold off. "How do you know that?" Richard whispered, his voice completely stripped of its former bravado. "How could you possibly know about the bank?" "Because I pay attention," I replied coldly. "I suggest you both take a deep breath and fix your faces. We have a dinner party to attend." Before either of them could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the onyx suite clicked open. Vanessa slipped out into the hallway, her eyes red and puffy from crying. When she saw me standing there in my tailored suit, she let out a dramatic sob. "You ruined my life," Vanessa cried. completely ignoring the tension between our parents. You are a bitter, jealous monster. Devin is asking questions about the timeline of your business, and Mom's story is falling apart. You have to fix this, Jocelyn. Suddenly, the heavy doors opened wider. A tall, impeccably dressed African-American man stepped out of the private room. It was Devin. His expression was stern, his posture rigid, and his sharp eyes immediately locked onto the chaotic scene in the hallway. Devin stood in the doorway of the Onyx suite, like a statue carved from absolute authority. He was a striking man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a custom navy suit that radiated quiet, generational wealth. His dark eyes scanned the hallway. He took in Patricia's pale face, Richard's sweating forehead, and Vanessa's blotchy cheeks. Finally, his gaze landed on me. He noted my emerald green suit and the absolute calm in my posture. Richard panicked. He immediately tried to exert his paternal dominance, hoping to mask the sheer terror of his financial ruin. He let out a booming, entirely fake laugh that echoed down the quiet, velvet-lined corridor. "Devin, my boy," Richard called out, his voice excessively loud and dripping with false cheer. "Just a little family reunion out here, nothing to worry about. Go back inside and enjoy your wine." Richard stepped directly between Devin and me, attempting to physically block me from his future son-in-law's line of sight. He tried to use his large frame to intimidate me, leaning in so close that the smell of expensive scotch and stale fear rolled off his breath. He dropped his voice to a harsh, desperate whisper, intending only for me to hear. "Listen to me very carefully," Richard hissed, his face turning an angry shade of red. "You are going to walk over to your little manager right now. You are going to tell him to comp our entire dinner bill. You will do it as a wedding gift for your sister. If you cover the tab tonight and keep your mouth shut about my bank accounts, I will forgive you for abandoning this family. I will let you back into our lives." I stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated narcissism it took to offer me forgiveness while standing in my building, eating my food, and trying to escape a bill he could not afford was breathtaking. It was a masterclass in financial gaslighting. He expected me to submit, just like I did when I was a 20-year-old girl, desperate for her father's approval. I did not lower my voice. I spoke clearly and sharply, ensuring the sound carried down the hallway, directly to where Devin was standing. "A wedding gift," I said smoothly. "That is a fascinating request, Richard. It reminds me of the last time you demanded a gift for Vanessa. Do you remember what happened the summer I turned 20? Richard's jaw clenched. "Shut your mouth, Jocelyn. Do not do this right now." I worked double shifts at a diner for 3 years. I continued, my voice ringing like a bell in the quiet corridor. "I saved $75,000 to pay for my law school tuition. I kept it in a joint account because I trusted you. And while I was at work, you marched into the bank, drained every single cent of my savings, and used it to pay for Vanessa's 6-month luxury vacation across Europe." Patricia gasped. She whipped her head around to check if Devin was listening. He was. Devin stood perfectly still, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. When I came home crying, I said, stepping closer to Richard, forcing him to look me in the eye. "When I begged you to give my tuition money back, do you remember what you told me? You said Vanessa deserved a cultural experience before she settled down. You told me I was smart enough to figure it out." "That is ancient history," Richard sputtered, his hands shaking as he desperately tried to maintain his authoritative posture. "You are twisting the facts to make us look bad. You owe us for raising you." "I am stating the facts," I replied coldly. "You told me to figure it out. Well, I figured it out. I built a hospitality empire from the ground up. I own the building you are standing in, and I refuse to pay a single cent for your dinner tonight. You drank 4 bottles of vintage champagne, Richard. I hope you enjoy the bill." Vanessa realized the situation was spiraling entirely out of their control. She saw Devin watching the exchange with a look of pure disgust on his face. She knew her billionaire fiancé despised liars and thieves. Devin built his venture capital firm on strict ethics, and his African-American family prided themselves on their flawless integrity. Vanessa had to pivot immediately to save her wealthy future. The angry, entitled sister vanished in the blink of an eye. The sobbing, fragile victim took her place. Vanessa let out a loud theatrical wail and threw herself across the hallway toward Devon. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive jacket, burying her face in his chest. "Devon, please," Vanessa cried, forcing massive tears to spill down her cheeks. "She is ruining my life. Jocelyn is so bitter and jealous of my happiness. She has always hated me. She is making up these horrible lies about our parents just to destroy our engagement dinner. She is crazy, Devon. You have to believe me." Patricia quickly jumped in to support the performance, rushing to stand behind her golden child. "It is true, Devon. Jocelyn has been deeply unwell for years. She makes up these delusions in her head to get attention. We try to get her help, but she refuses. She is just a sick, jealous girl trying to extort us for money we do not have." It was brilliant in its cruelty. They were literally standing in my club, having just been caught in massive lies regarding my success, and they were still trying to convince the world I was the crazy one. They wanted to paint me as a deranged outcast to protect their high society facade. I watched the spectacle unfold, without moving a single muscle. Devon did not hug Vanessa back. He did not wrap his arms around her shaking shoulders or whisper comforting words into her hair. His hands remained firmly at his sides. He looked down at his crying fiancée, his jaw tight with unspoken tension. Then he slowly lifted his head to look directly at me over her shoulder. Behind him, the heavy mahogany doors of the Onyx suite opened wider. The sound of clinking crystal silverware and soft jazz spilled out from the private room. Through the wide doorway, I could see Devon's parents. Lawrence and Beatrice were sitting at the grand dining table, turning in their seats to see what the commotion was about. Devon stood in the doorway of the Onyx suite, bringing a sudden, suffocating gravity to the velvet-lined hallway. He was a man who commanded venture capital boardrooms with a single glance, and right now that piercing gaze was focused entirely on the pathetic spectacle my family had created. Vanessa was still clinging to the lapels of his custom navy suit, her face buried in his chest, as she forced out loud, theatrical sobs. She was playing the role of the terrified, victimized bride to perfection, waiting for her strong, wealthy fiancé to wrap his arms around her and chase the bad sister away. Devon did not wrap his arms around her. He raised his large hands, firmly grasped Vanessa by the wrists, and physically detached her from his suit. He set her aside with a gentle but absolute finality. He did not look at her. His eyes were locked on Patricia, who had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. In her sheer, unadulterated panic at seeing Devon step into the hallway, my mother had lunged forward again. She grabbed my upper arm, her fingers clamping down like a vice, trying to physically drag me backward toward the emergency exit before Devon could ask any questions. "Patricia," Devon said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a lethal, rumbling authority that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Take your hands off her arm. Right now." My mother froze. She looked down at her hand, realizing how violent and unhinged she appeared. She immediately let go of my suit jacket, taking a hurried step back. The frantic, aggressive woman vanished in a microsecond. In her place, Patricia summoned the greatest performance of her life. She morphed instantly into a heartbroken, long-suffering mother. Tears welled up in Patricia's eyes. She brought a trembling hand to her chest, looking up at Devon with an expression of pure, fabricated agony. "I am so sorry you had to see this, Devon," my mother whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "We tried so hard to shield you and your wonderful family from our private tragedy. Jocelyn is having another one of her episodes." She gestured toward me with a tragic shake of her head. "She has been deeply mentally unwell for years," Patricia continued, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "She refuses to take her medication. She suffers from terrible delusions of grandeur. She wanders the city making up these wild fantasies about being a wealthy business owner. We were just trying to hold her arms to keep her from hurting herself or causing a scene in this beautiful restaurant. We just want to get her safely back to the facility." Richard immediately chimed in, nodding solemnly with his hands tucked into his pockets to hide their shaking. "It is a heavy burden, Devon. A father's greatest heartbreak is seeing his child lose her mind." We pay for her care, of course, but some nights she escapes and tracks us down. We were just trying to quietly escort her out before she ruined Vanessa's special night. Vanessa sniffled loudly from the sidelines, leaning against the wall, as if the sheer emotional weight of my existence was too much for her to bear. It is so hard, Devin. I love my sister, but she is so sick. She thinks she owns everything. She is completely delusional. I stood perfectly still in my emerald green power suit. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I did not scream that they were lying. I simply watched them perform. It was a fascinating psychological study in absolute desperation. They were betting their entire future on the hope that Devin would look at me, a woman standing in a custom-tailored suit, wearing a vintage Cartier watch, radiating absolute calm, and somehow believe I was a delusional vagrant who had wandered in off the street. Devin was not an idiot. He was a man whose entire career was built on analyzing data, identifying fraudulent startups, and reading the micro-expressions of desperate CEOs asking him for millions of dollars. He looked at my mother. He looked at my father. He looked at Vanessa. Then he took 2 slow steps forward until he was standing directly in front of me. Devin looked me up and down. He took in the impeccable tailoring of my clothes. He noticed the steady, unwavering contact of my eyes. He noticed that I was the only person in the hallway who was not sweating, crying, or shaking. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of glossy paper. He unfolded it with a sharp, crisp snap. It was the cover of Manhattan Elite magazine. My face was printed in high-definition ink, right above the words, "The Hidden Queen of Luxury." He held the magazine cover up next to my face, his dark eyes analyzing every single feature. "Your mother told my family you live in a trailer park and rely on her charity," Devin said, his voice a low, dangerous baritone. "Your sister just told me you are a bitter, unemployed outcast, trying to extort them. And your father claims you are having a psychotic episode right now." Devin lowered the magazine, keeping his eyes locked onto mine. "So I'm going to ask you one question," he said quietly. "Are you the Jocelyn from this cover?" I did not break eye contact. I stood tall, feeling the absolute power of 14 years of silent, relentless hard work, backing up my every word. "I am," I replied, my voice crystal clear and echoing down the velvet corridor. "I am the sole owner and CEO of Aura Estates. I own the building you are standing in. I employ the staff currently serving your parents. And I was explicitly uninvited from this dinner by my mother at 4 o'clock this afternoon because she stated my presence would be a humiliating embarrassment to your high society family." The silence that fell over the hallway was deafening. You could hear the faint clinking of crystal glasses from the main dining room, but right here, time simply stopped. I watched the realization hit Devin like a physical blow. The puzzle pieces clicked together in his brilliant analytical mind. He realized that the woman he was about to marry, the woman who had sworn she shared his strict moral compass and deep family values, was a pathological liar. He realized that the future in-laws he had welcomed to his table were grifters spinning a toxic web of deceit to elevate their own status. Devin slowly turned his head. His expression morphed from calm inquiry into something absolutely lethal. He glared at his fiancée. Vanessa shrank back against the wall, all of her fake tears instantly drying up under the weight of his furious gaze. Patricia let out a small, terrified gasp. Richard took a step backward, his face turning the color of ash. Before Vanessa could even open her mouth to spin another desperate lie, Devin spoke. His voice was cold enough to freeze the air in the hallway. "We are going back inside that room," Devin said, his gaze fixed on Vanessa. "And we are going to have a very honest conversation with my parents." Devin did not wait for Vanessa to stop crying. He turned his back on my sister and extended a hand toward the open mahogany doors. "Please join us," Jocelyn, Devin said. His tone was perfectly polite to me, yet laced with a silent warning aimed directly at my parents. "I believe my family owes you a proper introduction." Patricia let out a strangled gasp. She tried to step in front of me again, desperate to block my path. "Devin, no. This is a private family dinner. We should not subject you to her condition. We just need to get her home safely. Devin shot my mother a glare so cold it could have shattered glass. I said we are going inside, Patricia. All of us. Right now. Richard swallowed hard. He grabbed Patricia by the elbow, forcing her to back down. They had no choice. If they ran away now, they would lose their wealthy future son-in-law forever. If they went inside, they had to face the music. They chose to walk to their execution. I adjusted the cuffs of my emerald green suit and stepped confidently through the doorway. The onyx suite was exactly as I had designed it. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the dark wood paneling. The long table was set with flawless silver and the remnants of the vintage champagne my father could not afford. Seated at the head of the table were Lawrence and Beatrice. They were a striking couple. Lawrence possessed the quiet, imposing posture of a man who had built a real estate empire from the ground up. Beatrice sat beside him, radiating pure elegance in a tailored cream dress. They were true old money elite. They did not need to shout to be heard, and they absolutely did not tolerate fools. When I walked into the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Lawrence did not look at me with the pity or fear my mother had tried to orchestrate. He looked at me with immediate, unmistakable recognition. Lawrence pushed back his chair and stood up. He did not look at Vanessa, who was shuffling into the room behind me with ruined makeup. He did not look at Richard or Patricia, who were visibly sweating and refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Lawrence walked straight toward me and extended his hand. Jocelyn, Lawrence said, his deep voice carrying genuine warmth and absolute respect. I have to admit, seeing you walk through those doors is the best surprise I have had all year. I have been trying to get past your acquisitions team for 6 months to secure a meeting with you. I smiled genuinely and shook his firm hand. It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you, Lawrence. My team is notoriously protective of my schedule, but I have followed your commercial real estate ventures for years. Your latest merger in the financial district was a masterclass in strategy. Lawrence chuckled, a rich, booming sound that filled the room. Coming from the woman who revolutionized the luxury hospitality market in Manhattan, I will take that as the highest compliment. The way you restructured Aura Estates and aggressively acquired prime locations is nothing short of brilliant. I read the feature in Manhattan Elite this morning. They captured your business acumen perfectly. Behind me, I heard my father make a choking sound. Richard was physically trembling. He was watching a billionaire titan of industry speak to me not as a charity case, but as a respected equal. The realization that I was entirely out of his league was finally crashing down on him. All those years he called me a failure, and now the man he was desperately trying to impress was treating me like royalty. Beatrice stood up next. She moved with effortless grace, stepping around the table to join her husband. She looked me up and down, taking in my power suit and the absolute lack of hesitation in my posture. Then she smiled. "You are even more striking in person," Beatrice said. She extended her hand to me. "I am Beatrice. Devin has told us wonderful things about his fiancé's family, but clearly the best part was kept hidden from us." I shook her hand warmly. "Thank you, Beatrice. It is wonderful to meet you both. I only wish the circumstances of our introduction were more transparent." The warmth in Beatrice's eyes immediately cooled into a sharp, analytical gaze. She was a master at reading the room. She noticed Devin standing rigidly by the door, his jaw clenched in absolute fury. She noticed Vanessa wiping away mascara streaks and refusing to look up from the floor. And she certainly noticed Patricia and Richard looking like two criminals who had just been caught red-handed. Beatrice slowly turned her attention to my mother. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Patricia," Beatrice said. Her voice was soft, but it sliced through the silence like a scalpel. "I am trying to understand the dynamic here. When Lawrence brought out the magazine earlier, you looked as though you had seen a ghost," Patricia stammered. She gripped the back of an empty dining chair so hard her knuckles turned white. "I was just surprised," Patricia lied, her voice shaking violently. "Jocelyn is very private. She does not like us talking about her success. She prefers to stay out of the spotlight." "That is fascinating," Beatrice replied, tilting her head slightly. "Because that is not what you told us when we sat down for dinner tonight." Patricia's eyes darted wildly around the room. "Beatrice, please, you misunderstood my words." "I rarely misunderstand anything," Beatrice stated coldly. She took a step closer to my mother, completely ignoring the desperate panic radiating from Richard. When I asked why your eldest daughter was not attending this engagement dinner, you spun a very detailed, very tragic story. You told us she was entirely unfit for society. Beatrice paused, letting the heavy silence punish my parents before she delivered the final blow. Patricia. I am confused, Beatrice said, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. You told us your eldest daughter lived in a trailer park. You told us she was severely mentally unwell, incapable of holding a job, and entirely dependent on your charity to survive. Why would you say that about the CEO of the very establishment we are dining in? The silence in the Onyx suite was absolute. Beatrice's question hung in the air, sharp and inescapable. Why would Patricia tell the family of her future son-in-law that the CEO of this multi-million-dollar establishment was a delusional, unemployed burden? Patricia's face cycled through a dozen different shades of pale. She looked at Richard for help, but my father was staring at his water glass as if he wished he could drown in it. He had completely abandoned her to face the firing squad alone. Then my mother did the only thing a true narcissist knows how to do when backed into a corner. She tried to laugh it off. Patricia let out a high, brittle sound that was supposed to be a chuckle, but sounded more like a choke. She reached out and lightly touched Beatrice on the arm, attempting to establish some kind of fake, wealthy solidarity. "Oh, Beatrice, you completely misunderstood my intentions," Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You have to understand how difficult it is to protect a child in Jocelyn's position. She is so incredibly private. She absolutely hates the spotlight. The paparazzi, the stress of running such a massive hospitality empire. It takes a terrible toll on her. I made up that little story to ensure no one would bother her tonight. We just wanted her to have a peaceful evening, away from the pressures of high society." Richard immediately jumped on the lifeline. "Yes, exactly. We were protecting her. The corporate world is so demanding. We just wanted to keep her out of the public eye." It was a masterclass in manipulation. In the span of 30 seconds, my mother had tried to rewrite reality. She was attempting to reframe her toxic, hateful lies as the actions of a fiercely protective, loving mother. Lawrence did not buy a single word of it. He crossed his arms over his chest, his dark eyes fixed on Richard with a look of pure disgust. Beatrice slowly pulled her arm away from my mother's touch, treating Patricia like she was a walking disease. I stood at the end of the table, perfectly calm. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply reached into the pocket of my emerald green power suit and pulled out my phone. "Protecting my privacy," I repeated. The words echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "That is a beautiful narrative, Patricia. But let us see exactly how you protected me today." I unlocked my screen and walked slowly toward the center of the long dining table. I placed my phone flat on the pristine white tablecloth right between my mother and Devin. I turned the screen brightness all the way up. I did not hand it to them to read privately. I wanted the entire room to hear it. "This is the text message my loving, protective mother sent me at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon," I said, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. "I will read it aloud so there are no further misunderstandings." I looked directly into Patricia's terrified eyes and recited the words she had used to try and break me. "Do not come tonight. The head count is final. Devin's family is very high society, and I will not have you embarrassing us by talking about your little catering gigs. Stay home." The words landed like physical blows. The absolute brutal truth was now lying bare on the table. There was no room left for spin. There was no way to misinterpret the malicious, calculated cruelty of that message. Lawrence let out a harsh breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Devin stared at the phone screen, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. He looked from the text message to my mother, his expression radiating absolute revulsion. Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. "You told them I was mentally unstable because it was easier than admitting you cut me off 14 years ago," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You told them I was a failure because you could not stand the fact that I built an empire without a single cent of your money. You did not want to protect my privacy. You wanted to protect your fragile ego. Devin turned slowly to look at his fiancée. Vanessa had been standing frozen near the doorway, watching her wealthy high society future evaporate before her eyes. She saw the disgust on Devin's face. She saw Beatrice looking at their family like they were trash on the bottom of her shoe. Vanessa panicked. She realized that playing the quiet victim was no longer going to work. She had to go on the offensive. She had to make me the villain to save her engagement. Vanessa marched forward and slammed both of her hands flat onto the heavy cedar dining table. The crystal wine glasses rattled against the wood. "You are taking things completely out of context," Vanessa screamed, her voice shrill and echoing loudly in the private suite. "You are doing this on purpose to ruin my life. You have always been jealous of me." Vanessa pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, her chest heaving as she prepared to unleash a brand new web of lies. She looked frantically at Devin, trying to pull his attention away from the text message on the table. "Do not listen to her, Devin," Vanessa pleaded, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "Jocelyn is a bitter, estranged sister. She abandoned this family years ago. She is just trying to destroy us because she hates that I am the one getting married today." Vanessa gripped the edge of the heavy cedar table, her chest heaving, as she pointed her shaking finger directly at my face. She looked frantically at Devin, her eyes wide and overflowing with perfectly orchestrated tears. "She is a liar, Devin." Vanessa sobbed, her voice cracking with the exact theatrical emotion our mother had taught her to use since childhood. "Jocelyn is a sick, manipulative liar. She abandoned this family 14 years ago just to punish our parents. She never called us. She never cared about us. She is just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see anyone else find true love. She tracked down this dinner just to destroy my happiness because she has nothing of her own." Patricia immediately nodded along, her hands clasped together in desperate agreement. "It is true, Devin. She is obsessed with ruining her sister. Please, you have to believe us. We are victims of her cruelty." I stood at the end of the table and watched my younger sister perform. A lesser woman might have yelled back. A lesser woman might have slammed her own hands on the table and demanded respect. I did none of those things. Raising my voice would mean surrendering my power, and I was holding all the cards. I simply watched her cry my face, an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Devin did not move to comfort his crying fiancée. He stood like a stone pillar, his dark eyes shifting between the text message still glowing on the table and the hysterical woman beside him. His parents, Lawrence and Beatrice, sat in complete silence. They were observing the chaotic display with the cold, analytical detachment of people who had spent decades navigating corporate sharks and social climbers. Beatrice looked at Vanessa not with pity, but with profound clinical disgust. "Are you finished, Vanessa?" I asked quietly. Vanessa stopped mid-sob. She glared at me, her chest still heaving, her hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Before she could launch into another screaming fit, the heavy mahogany doors of the Onyx suite swung open. Felix stepped into the room. His charcoal suit was immaculate, and his posture was rigid with professional authority. He had clearly heard the shouting through the soundproofed walls and came to ensure my safety. "Boss, is everything all right in here?" Felix asked, his sharp eyes scanning the room and locking onto my father, who was still sweating profusely in the corner. "Do you require security?" "Everything is perfectly fine, Felix," I replied smoothly, never taking my eyes off Vanessa. "Actually, since you are here, could you do me a favor? Pull up the employee incident log on your tablet. Specifically, I need the files from 3 years ago. October." The color drained instantly from Vanessa's face. Her fake tears stopped completely. She took a sudden, staggering step backward, bumping into the back of her dining chair. "No," Vanessa whispered, her voice suddenly stripped of all its volume. "Do not do this." Patricia looked confused. "Incident log? What are you talking about, Jocelyn?" Felix tapped the screen of his tablet, his face a mask of strict professionalism. "I have the files from 3 years ago, boss. October 7th. Shall I read the summary?" "I will handle it." "Felix," I said. I turned my attention to Devin, who was watching my sister panic with intense, razor-sharp focus. "You see, Devin, My sister likes to paint herself as a victim, I said calmly. She likes to pretend I am a distant, estranged monster who abandoned my family. But 3 years ago, a young woman applied for a VIP hostess position right here at the Obsidian Room. She used a fake maiden name. She dyed her hair dark brown. She wore thick glasses to her interview. She thought she was being very clever. Vanessa covered her face with her hands, letting out a low, humiliated whimper. What she did not realize, I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room, is that I personally review the background checks and security footage of every single employee hired to work in my private clubs. I knew exactly who she was the second her application crossed my desk. I knew she was my sister. I knew she was broke. And because despite everything I still cared about my blood, I quietly approved her hiring so she could earn an honest living. Lawrence leaned forward in his chair, his interest deeply piqued. And what happened? She worked here for exactly 1 month, I said, looking directly at my mother, who was now staring at Vanessa in shock. Until my security team caught her on camera, stealing from the registers. She had been slipping hundreds of dollars from the petty cash drawer and pocketing the massive cash tips left by our high-roller clients. That is a lie, Richard shouted from the corner, desperately trying to protect his favorite child. Vanessa would never steal. You are making this up to ruin her. Felix tapped his tablet screen and placed it firmly on the table next to my phone. On the screen was a crystal-clear, high-definition security still of Vanessa wearing a hostess uniform, shoving a stack of $100 bills into her apron. Beside the photo was a scanned document bearing Vanessa's undeniable signature. She signed a full confession to avoid a felony grand larceny charge, Felix stated coldly, addressing Richard directly. She stole roughly $6,000 over the course of 4 weeks. I looked back at Devin. I could have had her arrested, I said softly. I could have sent her to prison for grand theft. Instead, I quietly fired her. I paid the $6,000 back to the club out of my own personal accounts so she would not face a criminal record. I swept her crime completely under the rug to protect her future. And this is how she repays me. By bringing you into my restaurant and calling me a bitter, jealous monster. The silence in the room was absolute. Patricia looked like she was going to be sick. She had worshipped Vanessa her entire life, treating her like a flawless angel while treating me like dirt. Now she was staring at irrefutable proof that her golden child was a common thief. Devin slowly turned his head to look at Vanessa. He did not look angry anymore. He looked entirely hollowed out, staring at her as if she were a stranger he had passed on the street. The man built his entire life and venture capital firm on strict transparency. He demanded absolute integrity from his partners, his friends, and his family. Devin took a slow, deep breath. His broad shoulders visibly tensed under his tailored suit. 3 years ago, Devin said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. October. Vanessa dropped her hands from her face. She reached out toward him, her fingers trembling. Devin, please, I can explain. It was a dark time in my life. I was confused. Devin did not let her touch him. He took a single step back, putting a definitive physical distance between them. His dark eyes locked onto hers, radiating pure, unadulterated disgust. You lied to me, Devin stated, the absolute finality in his tone echoing through the silent dining suite. You told me you spent that entire year doing charity work in Europe. The silence in the room was heavier than stone. Vanessa stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as she stared at the man she was supposed to marry. Devin had just dismantled her entire carefully curated persona with a single sentence. She had no defense. The undeniable proof of her grand larceny and her signed confession was sitting on the table right next to the text message where my mother banned me from this very room. Vanessa reached out a trembling hand toward Devin, attempting one last pathetic grasp at his sympathy. But Devin stepped back, his dark eyes radiating a cold, impenetrable distance. Seeing his favorite daughter cornered and realizing that his only ticket into high society was about to be canceled, my father panicked. Richard could not afford to lose this marriage. He needed Devin's venture capital connections to save his failing logistics company. He needed the social shield of Lawrence and Beatrice's old money empire. And right now I was the sole obstacle standing in his way. Richard slammed both of his heavy hands flat onto the cedar dining table. The silverware rattled violently against the fine china. He pushed himself up to his full height, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. He pointed a thick, shaking finger directly at me across the length of the table. "Do not listen to a single word she says." Richard bellowed, his voice booming with the aggressive artificial authority he used to bully his warehouse employees. "She is manipulating all of you. She is trying to turn you against Vanessa because she is a criminal. She is nothing but a common thief hiding behind a fancy green suit." Patricia gasped instantly, recognizing the angle Richard was playing. She immediately nodded, playing the role of the horrified, heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. Yes, Richard is right. We did not want to say anything tonight because we did not want to ruin the celebratory mood. But she forced our hand. She is a dangerous woman. I sat perfectly still in my chair. I reached forward, picked up my crystal glass of sparkling water, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Felix tensed behind me, ready to step forward and have security drag my father out of the building. I raised a single finger, signaling Felix to stand down. I did not want to interrupt my father. When an arrogant man is digging his own grave, the best thing you can do is hand him a bigger shovel. "A criminal," Lawrence repeated. His voice was low, incredibly calm, and laced with intense skepticism. Lawrence leaned back in his chair, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "That is a very heavy accusation to throw at the CEO of a multi-million-dollar hospitality group, Richard. I suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution." Richard puffed out his chest, completely mistaking Lawrence's quiet warning for genuine curiosity. He thought he had found his opening to save his family's reputation and secure Devon's venture capital money. "She did not build this empire on her own," Richard declared, sweeping his arm toward the crystal chandeliers and the velvet-lined walls. "She stole the seed money from me. 14 years ago, when I cut her off for dropping out of school, she retaliated by hacking into my logistics company accounts. She drained my corporate reserves. She committed unauthorized capital diversion and used my hard-earned wealth to fund her first business ventures." The sheer absurdity of the lie was almost breathtaking. My father, a man who could barely operate his own email inbox, was accusing me of masterminding a corporate cyber heist. Vanessa saw the opportunity and immediately jumped back into the performance. "It is true," she cried, wiping her dry eyes and looking up at Devon. "She stole from our father, Devon. That is the real reason we disowned her. We were too embarrassed to report our own flesh and blood to the police, so we kept it a family secret. We took a massive financial hit to protect her from going to prison, and this is how she repays us, by trying to ruin my engagement dinner." Devon looked from Vanessa to Richard, his expression turning entirely stoic. He did not buy a single word of it. Beatrice, sitting beside her husband, raised a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She looked at Richard as if he were a particularly unpleasant insect that had just crawled onto her pristine dining table. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You are claiming that a 20-year-old college dropout managed to bypass your corporate security, embezzle millions of dollars from your logistics firm without leaving a single trace, and then successfully launder that money into prime Manhattan real estate, all while you quietly looked the other way." Richard swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down the side of his face. He realized too late that he was trying to lie about high finance to people who controlled billions. "Yes. Exactly. She used offshore shell companies. She committed a massive breach of fiduciary trust. It was highly illegal. We have been trying to recover from the financial damage ever since. That is why our accounts might look a little tight right now, Lawrence. We are victims of corporate theft." Lawrence did not blink. He kept his eyes locked on my father. "As a man who deals in high-level corporate mergers and acquisitions every single day, I find your terminology fascinating, Richard. Tell me, did you file a loss report with the IRS? Did you notify your shareholders of this unauthorized capital diversion?" Richard stammered, his confident posture immediately deflating under the weight of an actual billionaire's scrutiny. "Well, no. Like my daughter said, we kept it in the family. We did not want to press formal charges. We are a forgiving family. Lawrence let out a sharp, humorless chuckle. You expect me to believe you took a multi-million-dollar loss on the chin and never reported it to your banking institution. I set my water glass down on the table. The soft clink of the crystal echoed in the sudden silence. Everyone turned to look at me. I smoothed the lapel of my emerald green power suit and offered my father a bright, terrifying smile. Are you entirely sure you want to discuss the finances of your logistics company tonight, Dad? I asked. My voice was light, conversational, and completely devoid of fear. Richard glared at me, his fists clenching at his sides. I have nothing to hide from these people. You are the fraud here, Jocelyn. You are a thief, and you are going to pay for what you did to this family. I shook my head slowly, feigning a look of deep sympathy. That is a very brave stance to take, Richard, especially considering who is sitting across the table from you. I gestured gracefully toward Devon's father. You see, Dad, when you decided to spin this ridiculous lie about me stealing your corporate reserves, you forgot to do your homework on the man you are desperately trying to impress. You see Lawrence as nothing more than a wealthy real estate mogul. But if you had bothered to read anything other than golf magazines, you would know that Lawrence also sits on the executive board of directors for Zenith Continental Bank. The color vanished from Richard's face instantly. He looked at Lawrence, his eyes wide with absolute paralyzing horror. The aggressive, booming patriarch was gone in a flash, replaced by a terrified man who suddenly realized he was standing in a room entirely filled with his executioners. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the heavy cedar table, and delivered the exact words that would seal my father's fate. Yes, Dad, I said smoothly, watching the panic swallow him whole. The very same Zenith Continental Bank that currently holds the commercial mortgages on all of your warehouses. The very same bank that froze your corporate accounts on Tuesday afternoon because you have not made a single payment in 4 months. So tell me, Richard, do you really want to stand here and lie about corporate theft to the man who just signed off on your default notices? The absolute silence in the room was suffocating. Richard stood frozen at the side of the table. His mouth hung slightly open, but his aggressive, booming voice had completely evaporated. The realization that he had just accused me of massive corporate theft in front of the very bank director who controlled his financial destiny hit him like a freight train. Lawrence did not break eye contact with my father. The billionaire real estate mogul slowly rested his hands on the table, his expression turning to pure ice. Now that you mention it, Jocelyn, Lawrence said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying calm. The name of your father's logistics company did cross my desk during our emergency board meeting on Tuesday morning. Zenith Continental Bank has a very strict policy regarding delinquent commercial accounts. We do not tolerate clients who default on multiple loans while continuing to display a lifestyle of excessive personal luxury. Richard began to physically shake. He took a stumbling step toward Lawrence, holding his hands up in a gesture of pathetic surrender. The aggressive, domineering patriarch was completely gone, replaced instantly by a sniveling, desperate debtor. Lawrence, please. Richard stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat. It is just a temporary cash flow problem. The shipping market has been volatile this quarter. I just need a small bridge loan to get through the month. I have been a loyal client of Zenith Continental for 20 years. We can sort this out quietly, man to man. Lawrence looked at my father with utter contempt. Zenith Continental is a bank, Richard. We are not a charity for men who cannot balance their own ledgers, and we certainly do not do business with men who lie to our faces at the dinner table. Beatrice leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in disgust. You sat here drinking vintage champagne, boasting about your massive wealth, all while my husband's bank was preparing to seize your assets. The absolute sheer audacity is repulsive. Richard looked wildly around the room. He looked at Vanessa, who was shrinking back against the wall. He looked at Patricia, who was gripping the edge of her chair as if the floor were about to open up and swallow her. Finally, he looked back at Lawrence, his eyes wide with sheer panic. I can pay it, Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. Just give me 30 days. I will sell some equipment. I will liquidate my personal stocks. You cannot take my warehouses. If you seize the commercial properties, my logistics company will be completely liquidated. I will lose everything. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, savoring the absolute desperation in my father's voice. I set the crystal glass down and folded my hands neatly on the table. Lawrence cannot give you a 30-day extension, Dad, I said smoothly. Richard snapped his head toward me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and sudden irrational anger. Keep your mouth shut, Jocelyn. This is adult business. You do not know anything about corporate banking. Lawrence cannot give you an extension. I repeated, my voice rising with absolute unyielding authority, because Zenith Continental Bank no longer owns your debt. Richard froze. The confusion on his face was almost comical. What are you talking about? I snapped my fingers once. Felix, who had been standing silently by the door like a perfectly tailored shadow, immediately stepped forward. He reached inside his jacket and produced a thick manila folder. He walked to the head of the table and placed it directly in front of me. I rested my hand on top of the folder. When I built Aura Estates, I did not just build restaurants and hotels, I explained, looking directly at my father. The luxury hospitality market requires securing prime real estate in the most competitive city in the world. To do that, I had to diversify my empire. 2 years ago, I formed a subsidiary private equity firm specializing exclusively in distressed debt acquisition. We buy out failing commercial properties for pennies on the dollar. Richard stared at the manila folder under my hand. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might pass out right there on the Persian rug. When Zenith Continental Bank prepared to auction off your commercial leases on Tuesday afternoon, my subsidiary stepped in. I said, my voice cold and surgical. The bank wanted to wipe their hands clean of your toxic accounts. So I bought them. I bought the primary mortgage on your main distribution center. I bought the loans on your delivery fleet. I picked up the manila folder and casually tossed it across the table. It slid across the white linen and stopped exactly an inch away from my father's trembling hands. You do not owe the bank anymore, Richard, I said, leaning forward. You owe me. I am your sole creditor. I legally own the logistics company you just accused me of stealing from. Vanessa let out a sharp, horrified gasp from the corner of the room. Devin watched the exchange in absolute silence, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the man who was supposed to be his father-in-law. Richard stared at the folder as if it were a live explosive. He slowly reached out and flipped it open. The official foreclosure notices, the debt transfer agreements, and the deed acquisitions were all right there, printed in crisp black ink. My name was signed at the bottom of every single page. No, Richard whispered, his voice completely hollowed out. No, this cannot be legal. You cannot just buy my company out from under me. It is entirely legal. Lawrence chimed in, his tone laced with dark amusement. Debt acquisition is a standard corporate practice. Your daughter just executed a flawless, perfectly legal, hostile takeover of your entire life. I must say, Jocelyn, your business strategies are even more ruthless than the magazine described. I respect that immensely. Patricia finally broke out of her paralyzed state. She pushed herself up from her chair, her entire body shaking. She looked at the papers in the folder. Then she looked at me with wild, terrified eyes. The company, Patricia stammered, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. If you own the logistics company and you own the commercial debt, what about the collateral? Richard, what did you put up for collateral on those loans? Richard could not look at his wife. He squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face in his hands. I will answer that for him, Patricia, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. To secure the last round of funding from the bank, Richard put up the only asset he had left. He put a second mortgage on your beautiful suburban house, the same house where you host your elite country club dinners, the same house where you threw my suitcases onto the lawn 14 years ago and told me I was a worthless embarrassment. Patricia let out a loud, piercing scream. She clutched both of her hands over her chest, stumbling backward as the sheer gravity of her ruin finally hit her. You bought the debt on our home, Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing frantically off the dark wood paneling. You own our house. You own the roof over our heads. Jocelyn, you cannot do this. You have to sign it back over to us right now. We are your parents. You cannot put us out on the street." I sat back in my chair and looked at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I looked at the woman who had lied to a billionaire's family just to keep me away from a dinner table. "I was planning to sign it back over to you," I replied, my voice completely devoid of a single ounce of mercy. "I bought your debt because I was going to forgive it. I was going to hand you the deeds tonight as a gesture of goodwill to celebrate Vanessa's engagement. I was going to save you from bankruptcy, Patricia. Until I received your text message at 4 o'clock this afternoon." The absolute gravity of my words hung in the air of the Onyx suite. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless sound, her hands dropping from her chest as her knees buckled slightly. Richard had to grab her elbow to keep her from collapsing onto the floor. I was going to save them. I had spent millions of my own money to buy their debt, fully intending to hand them the deeds to their home and their failing company as a wedding gift for my sister. All they had to do was include me. All they had to do was treat me like a human being for one single evening. But Patricia could not even manage that. She had chosen her toxic pride over her own salvation, and she had literally texted away the roof over her head. The sheer devastating reality of her own actions was visibly crushing my mother. She stared at me, her eyes wide and overflowing with panicked tears. She opened her mouth to speak, to beg, to try and spin another desperate lie, but a new voice cut through the heavy silence of the room. "That is quite enough." Beatrice stood up. The subtle scraping of her chair against the hardwood floor sounded like a gavel dropping in a courtroom. Devon's mother was a vision of absolute old-money elegance in her tailored cream dress, but right now her dark eyes were blazing with a cold, terrifying authority. Beatrice was a woman who prided herself on family integrity. She and Lawrence had built their massive wealth together, facing countless obstacles as an African-American power couple in a ruthless corporate world. They survived by valuing honesty, loyalty, and unwavering support for their children above all else. To Beatrice, the display of pure, unadulterated parental betrayal she had just witnessed was not just pathetic. It was unforgivable. Beatrice slowly walked around the grand cedar dining table. She did not look at Vanessa, who was cowering in the corner. She did not look at Richard, who was still sweating and holding his wife upright. Beatrice walked directly toward Patricia. My mother shrank back instinctively, recognizing that she was about to face the wrath of a true matriarch. "Patricia," Beatrice said, her voice dangerously quiet and perfectly controlled, "I have sat in boardrooms with some of the most ruthless, cutthroat corporate raiders on this planet. I have negotiated with people who would sell their own souls for a profit. But I have never in all my years seen a mother so eager to cannibalize her own child just to secure a seat at a table where she does not belong." Patricia whimpered, shaking her head frantically. "Beatrice, please, you do not understand the history here. Jocelyn has always been so difficult to manage. We were just trying to protect our family image. We wanted to make a good impression on you and Lawrence." "You wanted to impress us?" Beatrice repeated, a harsh, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "You thought the way to impress a family that values honor and unity was to throw your eldest daughter into the dirt. You sat at my table, drank my wine, and lied to my face to elevate yourself while burying your own flesh and blood. You are a disgrace to motherhood." The words struck Patricia like a physical blow. She sobbed, covering her face with her trembling hands. The high society facade she had spent decades meticulously crafting was shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Lawrence stood up to join his wife. He buttoned his suit jacket, his imposing figure towering over my shrinking father. "My wife is absolutely right," Lawrence stated, his booming voice leaving no room for argument. "When we agreed to this dinner, we were told we would be celebrating the union of two respectable families. Instead, we have been subjected to a pathetic display of financial fraud and parental cruelty. Richard, you accused your own daughter of grand larceny to cover up your gross incompetence as a businessman. You are a coward. I will be personally calling the executive board of Zenith Continental Bank tomorrow morning to ensure they sever all remaining ties with your logistics firm." Richard let out a pathetic, pleading noise, but Lawrence completely ignored him. The billionaire real estate mogul turned his attention to me. His stern expression instantly softened into a look of profound respect. Jocelyn, Lawrence said, offering me a slight, respectful nod. I apologize for the behavior of the people who brought you into this world. What you have built here, and the grace with which you have handled this grotesque betrayal is remarkable. My office will reach out to your team on Monday. I believe Aura Estates and my firm have a great deal of highly profitable business to discuss. I returned his nod, offering a calm, professional smile. I look forward to it, Lawrence. The absolute contrast was staggering. In the span of 20 minutes, my parents had lost their home, their company, their reputation, and their wealthy connections. Meanwhile, I had just secured a massive corporate partnership with one of the most powerful families in New York. Vanessa realized that her entire future was currently slipping through her fingers and vanishing into thin air. Her parents were destroyed, her sister was victorious, and the wealthy family she was desperately trying to marry into was actively preparing to leave the room. Vanessa panicked. She lunged forward, practically throwing herself at Devon. She grabbed his arm with both hands, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the sleeve of his custom navy suit. Devon, please, Vanessa cried, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. Do not listen to them. Do not let this ruin our night. This has nothing to do with us. We are getting married. We are going to build our own life together. Devon looked down at the woman holding his arm. His dark eyes were empty, stripped of all the warmth and love he had shown her when they first walked into my club. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger who had just tried to pick his pocket. Vanessa saw the coldness in his eyes and tried to pull him closer, tears streaming down her face. It is just family drama, baby, Vanessa begged, her voice shrinking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Every family has issues. My parents made some mistakes, but that is their problem. It does not affect us. Devon stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he slowly and deliberately pulled his hand away from Vanessa's grasp. It affects everything. The sound of Devon pushing his heavy dining chair back echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He stood to his full height, smoothing the front of his custom navy suit with absolute precision. He looked down at Vanessa with an expression devoid of any warmth. Vanessa tried to reach for his hand again, her fingers trembling wildly, but Devon took a deliberate step back. He created an impenetrable wall of physical and emotional distance between them. It affects everything, Vanessa, Devon said. His voice was incredibly calm, which made the underlying anger all the more terrifying. When I asked you to marry me, I told you that my family was built on a foundation of absolute truth. I told you that in my world, trust is the only currency that actually matters. I made it very clear that I would never tolerate deception in my inner circle. Vanessa shook her head frantically, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, playing the desperate, heartbroken victim. I was young, Vanessa cried, her voice cracking perfectly. I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Devon. You cannot throw away our entire future over something stupid I did 3 years ago. I was just a confused girl. Devon did not blink. His dark eyes remained fixed on her, radiating pure, clinical disgust. It is not about the money you stole, Devon replied, his tone remaining perfectly level. It is about the fact that you signed a full confession for grand larceny, and your sister paid thousands of dollars out of her own pocket to keep you out of a prison cell. She saved your entire future. And how did you repay her? You brought me into her restaurant tonight and called her a bitter, jealous monster. You looked me right in the eye and tried to convince me she was a delusional outcast who abandoned this family. Vanessa opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. The undeniable truth of her betrayal was suffocating her. She looked frantically around the room, searching for a lifeline. She looked at Richard, but my father was staring blankly at the floor, paralyzed by his own financial ruin. She looked at Patricia, but my mother was clutching her chest, completely consumed by her own catastrophic downfall. Realizing that no one was going to swoop in and save her, Vanessa did the only thing a true narcissist can do. She immediately looked for someone else to blame. She spun around and pointed an accusing finger directly at Patricia. It was her idea, Vanessa screamed, completely throwing her mother under the bus to save her own engagement. My mother forced me to lie. She told me your family would reject me if they knew the truth about my past. She is the one who made up the story about Jocelyn being crazy. I just wanted to be good enough for you, Devin. I was just following her orders so we could be together." Patricia let out a loud, horrified gasp. She stared at Vanessa, reeling from the sudden vicious betrayal of her favorite child. After decades of treating Vanessa like a flawless angel, Patricia was finally seeing the monster she had created. Devin shook his head slowly. He looked at Vanessa with a mixture of pity and absolute revulsion. "You are willing to throw your own mother to the wolves the second it benefits you," Devin stated quietly. "You have absolutely no loyalty to anyone but yourself. You are exactly like them, Vanessa. You are a product of this toxic environment, and I refuse to bring that poison into my family." "No," Vanessa wailed, taking a desperate step forward. "Please, Devin, I love you. I cannot marry a woman capable of such deep pathological deception," Devin said, cutting her off with absolute finality. "I cannot build a life with someone who would actively participate in the destruction of her own sister just to secure a dinner reservation. I value loyalty and honesty above all else, and you possess neither of those traits." Devin buttoned his suit jacket, signaling the end of the conversation. "The engagement is officially over," Devin declared. "Do not contact me. Do not call my parents. We are done here." Vanessa stood frozen in place. The reality of his words crashed down on her like a collapsing building. She realized that it was actually over. The billionaire lifestyle, the high society galas, the endless wealth, the prestige she had craved her entire life. It was all gone. It had vanished in the span of 30 minutes. Devin turned away from her completely. He looked at Lawrence and Beatrice, who were already standing up and gathering their things. He gave them a sharp nod, signaling that it was time to leave this toxic wasteland behind. Vanessa watched them prepare to walk out the door. She realized she had lost everything. Her parents were bankrupt. Her engagement was destroyed. Her fake glamorous life was reduced to ashes. The sadness on her face instantly evaporated. The desperate crying victim vanished entirely. Vanessa turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes darkened with a sudden, unhinged fury. She did not blame herself for stealing. She did not blame Patricia for lying. She blamed me for existing. She blamed me for refusing to stay hidden in the shadows while she stole the spotlight. "You ruined my life," Vanessa screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing wildly off the wood-paneled walls. Before anyone could react, Vanessa lunged forward. She threw her entire body across the heavy cedar dining table, desperately trying to grab my throat. Her hands knocked over the crystal wine glasses, sending the remnants of the expensive vintage champagne spilling across the pristine white linen. Silverware crashed to the floor. Patricia screamed in terror. I did not even flinch. I did not move a single muscle. Before Vanessa's frantic hands could even come close to my suit, a dark blur moved across my peripheral vision. Felix moved with terrifying, blinding speed. He stepped smoothly between me and the table, intercepting Vanessa mid-lunge. Felix grabbed Vanessa by the shoulders and forcefully shoved her back into her dining chair, pinning her in place with absolute cold professional authority. "Do not touch the boss," Felix warned, his voice dangerously low and sharp as a razor blade. Vanessa collapsed back into the heavy cedar dining chair, her chest heaving as she stared up at Felix in sheer terror. My executive director did not move an inch. He stood like a perfectly tailored wall of stone between me and my sister's unhinged fury. The vintage champagne she had knocked over during her frantic lunge dripped slowly off the edge of the table, soaking deep into the thick Persian rug. Shattered crystals sparkled on the hardwood floor, mirroring the absolute destruction of my family's fabricated high society life. Lawrence buttoned his suit jacket, entirely unbothered by the broken glass, and spilled wine at his feet. The billionaire real estate mogul turned away from the pathetic display and looked directly at me. He offered a deep, respectful nod. "Jocelyn, you have handled a spectacularly ugly situation with absolute class," Lawrence said, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "I will have my acquisitions team contact your corporate office first thing Monday morning. I look forward to building a highly profitable partnership with Aura Estates." Beatrice stepped up beside her husband. She completely ignored my mother, who was currently clutching her chest and trembling in her seat like a cornered animal. Beatrice looked at me, her dark eyes shining with genuine admiration. It is a rare thing to meet a woman who can walk through fire and come out holding the matches, Beatrice stated, her tone radiating the kind of old money elegance my mother had spent decades failing to mimic. "We will see you soon, Jocelyn." Devon was the last to leave. He stood near the doorway, casting one final freezing glance at the woman he was supposed to marry. Vanessa sobbed into her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she mourned the loss of the billionaire lifestyle she had lied to secure. Devon did not offer her a single word of comfort. He gave me a brief, solemn nod of professional respect, turned on his heel, and followed his parents out of the onyx suite. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind them. The silence that flooded the private dining room was suffocating. The grand illusion was officially dead. The elite audience they had tried to impress was gone. They were sealed inside this velvet-lined room, with the very daughter they had thrown away, and there was nowhere left to run. Richard stared blankly at the stained tablecloth, paralyzed by the realization that his logistics company and his suburban mansion now legally belonged to me. Vanessa wept uncontrollably, rocking back and forth in her chair. Patricia looked like a hollow shell of the arrogant, dominating socialite she had pretended to be just an hour ago. Her makeup was smudged, her posture had collapsed, and she was shaking so hard her jewelry rattled. I smoothed the lapel of my emerald green power suit and took my seat at the head of the table. I looked at the three of them sitting in the wreckage of their own toxic lies. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the clean, sharp edge of long overdue justice. I raised my right hand and gave Felix a single subtle nod. Felix adjusted his cuffs and stepped away from Vanessa. He walked gracefully over to the dark wood serving station in the corner of the suite. He picked up a sleek black leather checkbook, turned around, and carried it back to the table. He did not hand it to Richard, who was supposed to be the wealthy patriarch funding this lavish celebration. Felix placed the leather folder directly on the white linen tablecloth in front of Patricia. My mother flinched violently as the leather touched the table. She looked up at Felix, her eyes red and swollen with panic. "What is this?" Patricia rasped, her voice hoarse and broken. "This is your final dinner bill," Madame Felix stated. His tone was perfectly polite, but entirely stripped of any actual warmth. "As you explicitly requested earlier this evening, we ensured your guests were served the absolute highest tier of our imported caviar selection, along with 4 bottles of the 1990 vintage Dom Perignon. You insisted to our waitstaff that price was absolutely no object when celebrating your daughter." Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for the leather folder. She slowly flipped it open. Her eyes darted immediately to the bottom line of the receipt. The remaining color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. She gasped, dropping the folder back onto the table as if the paper had burned her fingers. $42,000? Patricia choked out, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical squeak. "You are charging us $42,000 for one single meal." Richard snapped his head up. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of the number momentarily overrode his paralyzing fear. He slammed his heavy fist onto the table, making the remaining silverware jump. "You have lost your mind!" Richard shouted, his face turning an angry shade of crimson. "We are not paying this. You own the building, Jocelyn. You are the CEO of this entire company. You can just void the transaction in your computer system. Make it disappear right now." Patricia nodded frantically, pushing the black leather folder away from her, as if distancing herself from the physical object would somehow erase the debt. "Exactly." Patricia pleaded desperately, trying to find a way out of the financial slaughterhouse she had walked herself into. "We are not paying a single cent of this. You own the restaurant. It is on the house. You can just comp the entire meal. It costs you absolutely nothing to wipe the slate clean." I leaned forward slowly. I rested my forearms on the cedar table and looked directly into my mother's terrified, begging eyes. "You are absolutely right, Patricia," I said smoothly, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "I do own the restaurant. I have the absolute authority to wipe away any bill I choose with a single keystroke, and I always comp the meals for my family. I let the words hang in the air for a fraction of a second, watching a brief, pathetic glimmer of hope ignite in my mother's eyes before I delivered the final crushing blow. But as you explicitly stated in your text message to me at 4 o'clock this afternoon, I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute ice. I am not family. The absolute silence in the private dining suite felt heavy, thick with the scent of spilled vintage champagne and sudden crushing defeat. Richard glared at me, his face contorting into a mask of pure, humiliated rage. He refused to accept that the power dynamic had completely shifted. He still thought he could buy his way out of the corner he had backed himself into. Richard let out a harsh, guttural scoff. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and yanked out a thick leather wallet. He slammed it down onto the cedar table with enough force to make the remaining silverware clatter against the fine china. "We do not need your pathetic charity, Jocelyn." Richard spat, his voice trembling with furious indignation. He ripped a heavy metal platinum corporate card from the leather slot and threw it directly at my chest. It bounced off the edge of the table and landed right next to the black leather checkbook. "I am a wealthy man," Richard growled, jutting his chin out in a desperate attempt to look intimidating. "I built a massive logistics empire. I can pay for a single dinner without breaking a sweat. Run the card. Charge the $42,000, and let us walk out of this miserable building. We will never step foot in your restaurant again." I did not even look at the platinum card resting on the white linen tablecloth. I simply leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. Felix stepped forward immediately. He reached into the inner pocket of his immaculate charcoal suit and produced a sleek black mobile payment terminal. He picked up the heavy metal card with 2 fingers, holding it as if it were a piece of garbage he had found on the sidewalk. He slid the chip into the top of the machine. The private dining room was dead silent. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic tapping of Felix entering the $42,000 charge into the digital keypad. He pressed the green confirmation button. We waited. 2 seconds later, a sharp, angry beep echoed through the suite. A bright red light flashed across the screen of the mobile terminal. "Declined," Felix stated clearly, his voice carrying the precise, detached tone of a professional executioner. Richard blinked. The angry, confident posture instantly faltered. "What are you talking about? That is a corporate platinum account. It has a limitless ceiling. Your machine is broken. Run it again." Felix smoothly slid the card out and inserted it a second time. He pressed the button. "Beep. Declined," Felix repeated. "The bank has blocked the transaction." "That is impossible!" Richard shouted, his voice cracking with sudden raw panic. He tore his wallet open and began ripping out every single piece of plastic he owned. He threw a gold card onto the table. "Run that one. It is my personal account." Felix picked up the gold card. He inserted it into the machine. "Beep. Declined." Felix said, his expression completely blank. Richard was hyperventilating now. He threw another card, then another. He was emptying his entire wallet, tossing premium credit cards across the spilled champagne, like a desperate gambler throwing his last chips onto a losing roulette table. Felix ran them all one by one. The sharp, punishing beep of the terminal filled the room like a countdown to a detonation. "Declined, declined, declined." "Stop playing games with the machine!" Richard bellowed, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. "You are doing this on purpose. You are manipulating the system to humiliate me." "I am not manipulating anything, Dad," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. "I told you exactly what happened. Zenith Continental Bank froze your corporate accounts on Tuesday afternoon because you defaulted on your massive commercial loans. When a bank seizes a corporate entity for gross financial delinquency, they immediately lock down every single personal asset tied to the guarantor. Your accounts are dead. You have absolutely zero liquidity. You do not have a single cent to your name." Patricia let out a strangled gasp. She finally realized that Richard was entirely powerless. She realized that the $42,000 bill sitting in front of her was not going to magically disappear. If Richard could not pay it, she was going to be held responsible. Patricia grabbed her designer handbag from the floor. She dumped the entire contents onto the dining table. Designer lipsticks, expensive compacts, and a silver card holder spilled across the wood. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely open the clasp of the card holder. "I have my own accounts," Patricia stammered, her breathing rapid and shallow. "I have the cards I use at the country club. They are entirely separate from the logistics company. I can cover the bill. Just give me the machine." She shoved a handful of premium credit cards toward Felix. Felix looked at me for permission. I gave him a single slow nod. Felix took Patricia's cards. He ran the first one. Beep, declined. Patricia let out a high-pitched whimper. "No, no, try the other one. Try the blue one." Felix ran the blue card. Beep, declined. Patricia grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning completely white. She looked at Richard, her eyes wide with absolute unadulterated terror. "Richard, why are my cards declining? These are my personal accounts. Why are they locked?" "Because you are married to him, Patricia," I said, my voice cutting through her panic like a surgical blade. "Your name is on the deed to the suburban house he used as collateral for his failed business loans. When my subsidiary firm bought his debt and initiated the foreclosure process, your assets were frozen right alongside his. The bank flagged everything. You are just as bankrupt as he is." Vanessa had been sitting frozen in her chair watching the financial slaughterhouse unfold before her eyes. She reached into her own purse and pulled out the shiny black credit card she used to fund her lavish lifestyle. "Wait," Vanessa whispered, staring at the plastic in her hand. "My card is linked to Mom's account." I looked at my younger sister. "Yes, Vanessa. Your free ride is officially over. You cannot buy a single cup of coffee right now, let alone a $42,000 dinner." The sheer magnitude of the situation finally crashed down upon them. They were sitting in the most exclusive private dining club in Manhattan. They had consumed thousands of dollars worth of vintage champagne and imported caviar. They had intentionally run up a massive astronomical bill because they thought they could use my restaurant to show off for a billionaire family, and now they could not pay for a single bite of it. In the state of New York, consuming tens of thousands of dollars in food and beverage without the ability to pay is not a simple civil dispute. It is grand larceny. It is a severe felony punishable by years in prison. They could not simply walk out the front door and ignore the bill. If they tried to leave without paying, my security team would hold them. The police would be called and they would be arrested for theft of services. They would be hauled out of the obsidian room in handcuffs. The high society facade completely shattered. The arrogant, abusive woman who had tormented me for 34 years finally broke. Patricia collapsed forward, resting her forehead against her hands. Genuine, unfiltered tears of absolute panic spilled down her face, ruining her expensive makeup and dripping onto the ruined tablecloth. She looked up at me, her entire body trembling with fear. "Please," Patricia sobbed, her voice reduced to a pathetic, broken whisper. "Please, Jocelyn, we do not have the money. They will arrest us." I stared back, entirely stone-faced. I stared back at my mother, entirely stone-faced. The tears streaming down Patricia's cheeks were not born from regret or sorrow for how she had treated me. They were the tears of a cornered animal realizing the trap had permanently snapped shut. She was not mourning our relationship. She was mourning her own survival. "You are looking at a minimum of 5 to 15 years in a state penitentiary, Patricia," I said, my voice echoing evenly across the grand cedar table. In the state of New York, theft of services exceeding $3,000 is a Class D felony. You just consumed $42,000 of vintage champagne and imported caviar with zero liquid assets to your name. If I give Felix the signal right now, my security team will lock the heavy mahogany doors of this suite. We will call the New York Police Department. You, Richard, and Vanessa will be escorted out of the main lobby in handcuffs." Patricia let out a guttural wail. She slumped over the table, her hands grasping wildly at the pristine white linen, as if trying to anchor herself to a reality that no longer existed. Richard tried to salvage his ruined pride. He puffed out his chest, though his shoulders were visibly shaking. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You cannot do this to your own family. Richard barked, his voice cracking with desperation. I will write you a post-dated check. I will sign a promissory note. Give me 30 days and I will liquidate some personal assets to cover the dinner. You cannot send us to jail over a restaurant bill. I did not even blink. A promissory note from a bankrupt man is just a worthless piece of paper, Richard. You do not have any personal assets left to liquidate. My firm owns the deed to your house. We own the commercial leases to your warehouses. You are entirely destitute. Patricia reached out, her shaking fingers hovering inches from my arm. Please, Jocelyn, she begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic, high-pitched whisper. Please do not call the police. I cannot go to jail. The scandal would completely destroy us. Our friends at the country club would see the mugshots. I will do anything you want. I will apologize. I will publicly say I was wrong. Just let us leave. I looked at the woman who had banned me from this very room just a few hours prior. The irony was almost intoxicating. I am not going to call the police, I replied smoothly. Patricia let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. She slumped back in her chair, pressing a hand to her chest. Richard wiped the heavy sweat from his forehead. They actually thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated me by playing the family card one last time. But I'm not letting you walk out of here for free, I continued, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy chill. You consumed my food. You drank my wine. You insulted my staff. And you tried to destroy my reputation in front of the very people you were desperate to impress. You are going to pay a price tonight. I raised my hand and gave Felix a single subtle nod. Felix stepped forward immediately. He carried a small, polished silver tray. He placed the silver tray directly in the center of the table, right next to the declined platinum credit cards and the black leather checkbook. Put your car keys on the tray, I commanded. Richard froze. He looked at the silver tray, then glared up at me with sheer confusion. What are you talking about? I am talking about the 3 luxury vehicles currently parked in the VIP valet garage downstairs, I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. A Mercedes-Benz sedan for Patricia, a custom Range Rover for Vanessa, and a Porsche Cayenne for yourself. Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. Those are our personal vehicles. You have no right to touch them. Touch. You do not own those vehicles, Richard, I countered, shutting him down with absolute authority. You leased all 3 of those luxury cars under your logistics company's name to write them off as a corporate tax deduction. You used company funds to finance your family's high society image. But as we established earlier this evening, I am the sole creditor and legal owner of your logistics company, which means my firm legally owns the corporate leases on those vehicles. I am repossessing my property. Put the keys on the tray. Patricia gasped in absolute horror. You cannot take my car, she cried, looking at me as if I had just asked her to cut off her own arm. How are we supposed to get back to the suburbs? We live an hour away. You can walk out the front doors of my building, head 2 blocks east, and take the subway, I replied, my expression completely blank. The subway. Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the dark wood paneling. I am wearing a $5,000 designer dress. I cannot ride the public train with common people. It is past midnight. It is not safe. You should have thought about your transportation options before you tried to scam a $42,000 dinner out of the daughter you threw away, I stated coldly. Put the keys on the tray or Felix makes the phone call to the police, and you can ride in the back of a squad car instead. The choice is yours. Richard stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He realized he was completely trapped. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his Porsche keys, and threw them violently onto the silver tray. The metal clattered loudly. Patricia sobbed, digging into her ruined designer handbag. She pulled out her Mercedes key fob and placed it next to her husband's with a trembling, defeated hand. I turned my gaze toward the end of the table. Vanessa was sitting rigidly in her chair. The golden child was clutching her expensive leather purse tightly against her chest. She glared at me, her eyes burning with the furious, entitled rage of a spoiled child who had just lost her billionaire fiancé and her fake lifestyle in a single evening. "Your turn, Vanessa," I said. "No!" Vanessa spat, her voice shaking with arrogant defiance. "I am not giving you my keys. Dad gave me that Range Rover as an early wedding gift. It belongs to me. I am not riding a filthy public train like some kind of peasant. I am taking my car and I am driving home." Vanessa stood up abruptly. She slung her designer purse over her shoulder and turned fiercely toward the heavy mahogany doors, fully intending to march out of the suite and demand her vehicle from the valet. I did not move to stop her. I simply smiled. "You can certainly try to drive it home, Vanessa," I called out, my voice stopping her dead in her tracks. "But you should know that when a corporate account goes into catastrophic default, the authorized use of all leased vehicles is immediately terminated. My legal team officially voided your driving privileges this morning." Vanessa turned her head and sneered at me. "I do not care about your stupid legal team. I have the physical key. The valet will give me the car. You cannot stop me." "I am not going to stop you, Vanessa," I replied, my smile widening into something sharp and terrifying. "But the police definitely will. Because exactly 10 minutes ago, I had my security team officially report that Range Rover as stolen." Vanessa froze. The arrogant sneer vanished from her face instantly. "If you walk out of this building and turn the ignition of that vehicle," I continued, letting the absolute severity of my words sink into her mind, "you will not just be driving without permission. The license plates are already flagged in the police database. You will be pulled over before you even reach the highway, and you will be arrested on the spot for grand theft auto." I gestured gracefully toward the silver tray on the table. "So I suggest you put the keys down, Vanessa, unless you think orange is your best color." Vanessa stared at the shiny black key fob resting in her trembling palm. The threat of a grand theft auto charge hung in the air, heavy and absolute. She looked at me, her red eyes searching my face for any hint of a bluff. She found none. I was entirely serious. I would let the police drag my own sister out of a stolen vehicle tonight without batting an eye. Vanessa let out a choked, defeated sob. Her shoulders slumped forward as the last remaining shred of her arrogant defiance completely evaporated. She dropped the key fob onto the silver tray. It landed next to Richard's Porsche keys and Patricia's Mercedes keys with a final hollow clatter. Felix stepped forward smoothly and pulled the silver tray away from the table. He stood by the wall holding the last physical remnants of their fabricated high society lifestyle. They had absolutely nothing left. No cars, no money, no company, no house, and no wealthy future in laws to save them. Patricia looked at the empty table, then looked up at me. The reality of taking the subway home in a $5,000 designer dress finally broke her. She fell to her knees right there on the wine-soaked Persian rug. She reached out her hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my suit trousers. "Jocelyn!" "Please," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with raw, frantic emotion. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I know we made mistakes. I know we were hard on you when you were younger. But we did our best. Everything I ever did, I did because I love you. You cannot throw your own family away like this. Please, just give us another chance." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel the familiar childhood urge to comfort her. I only felt a cold, clinical disgust. "You did your best," I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You did everything out of love." I took a deliberate step back, forcing her to let go of my clothes. Patricia's hands fell empty to the floor. "When I was 12 years old," I said, my voice echoing sharply in the quiet dining suite, "I spent an entire summer doing chores for the neighbors just to save up enough money to adopt a golden retriever puppy from the local shelter. I loved that dog. It was the only thing in that massive empty suburban house that actually showed me any genuine affection." Patricia froze on the floor. Her fake tears stopped instantly. She knew exactly what story I was about to tell, and the sheer terror of having her deepest cruelty exposed paralyzed her. "One day I came home from school and the dog was gone." I continued, making sure Richard and Vanessa heard every single word. "You told me he ran away. You watched me cry for weeks. You watched me walk up and down the streets, putting up flyers in the freezing rain. You held me while I sobbed, telling me that sometimes things just leave us. I leaned down, looking directly into Patricia's wide, horrified eyes. But he did not run away, did he? Patricia, I said softly. I only found out the truth 5 years later because Richard got drunk at a holiday party and thought it was hilarious to brag about how easy it was to trick a child. You sold my dog. You found a breeder 2 towns over and you sold him for cash because you said his barking gave you a headache and his fur ruined the aesthetic of your pristine living room. And the very next week you walked into the country club carrying a brand new limited edition Prada handbag. Vanessa let out a small gasp from her chair. Even the golden child had not known the truth about that particular incident. You sold the only thing I loved to buy a purse, I stated coldly, standing back up to my full height. Do not ever kneel on my floor and speak to me about a mother's love. You do not know the meaning of the word. There is no love here. There is only what you can extract from people to serve your own vanity. Richard stepped forward and grabbed Patricia by the arms. He hauled his weeping wife up from the floor, his face twisted with pure defeated hatred. You are a monster! Richard spat, his chest heaving as he glared at me. I am the monster you created, I replied smoothly. And now you have exactly 2 minutes to vacate my property before I have my security team physically throw you out onto the street. Richard wrapped his arm around Patricia, holding her upright. Vanessa grabbed her empty designer purse and stood up on shaky legs. Stripped of their fake wealth, their high society engagement, and their toxic pride, the three of them turned toward the heavy mahogany doors. They looked like ghosts. They had walked into this private room acting like billionaires, and they were leaving as destitute frauds who had to figure out how to navigate the public transit system after midnight. Richard reached out and pulled the heavy doors open. What they expected was an empty hallway. What they expected was a quiet, unnoticed exit where they could scurry away into the dark city streets and hide their absolute shame. That is not what happened. When the doors swung open, the velvet-lined corridor was completely illuminated. Standing in 2 perfect silent rows stretching all the way from the private suite to the front lobby was the entire staff of the Obsidian Room. Dozens of waiters, bartenders, hostesses, and security guards stood at absolute attention. The same waiters Patricia had snapped her fingers at earlier in the evening. The same sommelier she had belittled while ordering vintage champagne. The same host she had spoken down to when she arrived. They did not say a word, they did not whisper, they did not point or laugh. They simply stood there, their eyes locked in dead silence, on the 3 frauds who had spent the entire evening treating them like garbage. It was a perfectly orchestrated guard of honor for their walk of shame. The ultimate, inescapable public humiliation for a family of narcissists. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan penthouse, casting a brilliant golden light across my glass desk. I sat in my high-backed leather chair, holding a steaming cup of black espresso. For the first time in 14 years, my chest felt completely hollowed out in the best possible way. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations had been entirely eradicated. The air in my office felt clean, crisp, and charged with absolute freedom. I looked down at the architectural blueprints for my next luxury resort, feeling a profound sense of peace. The nightmare was over. I had faced the monsters of my past, and I had watched them walk out of my building with absolutely nothing. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Felix stepped into the room looking as impeccably sharp in the morning light as he had the night before. He carried a silver tray with a fresh carafe of espresso and a stack of printed legal documents. "Good morning, Boss Felix," said smoothly, setting the tray down on my desk. "I have the final security report from last night. Your parents and your sister walked 3 blocks to the subway station. Our security detail monitored them from a distance to ensure they left the premises. Patricia cried the entire way. Vanessa broke the heel off one of her designer shoes on a subway grate. They boarded the downtown train just after 1 in the morning. I took a sip of my espresso, savoring the rich, bitter taste. And the corporate assets, all secured. Felix replied, tapping the stack of documents. At exactly 6 o'clock this morning, my team arrived at your father's commercial warehouses. We officially changed the locks on all the exterior doors. The delivery fleet has been grounded and secured. The liquidation process of the logistics company has officially begun. Perfect, I said. Before Felix could say another word, the private phone sitting on the corner of my desk began to ring. It was a direct, encrypted line. Only my highest-level executives and my legal team had the number. I glanced at the caller ID on the digital display. It was a blocked number, but I already knew exactly who was on the other end. Felix looked at the ringing phone, his jaw tightening. Should I intercept? No, I replied, reaching for the receiver. I want to hear this. I picked up the phone and brought it to my ear. I did not say hello, I just waited. Jocelyn, a ragged, exhausted voice croaked through the speaker. It was Richard. He sounded like a man who had not slept a single second. He sounded like a man who had spent the entire night frantically calling every lawyer, accountant, and banker in his contacts list, only to realize that every single word I said last night was the absolute truth. Jocelyn, please do not hang up. Richard begged, his voice stripped of all its aggressive, booming authority. I need to talk to you. I need to see you. We have to set up a meeting today to renegotiate this. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked out at the sprawling New York skyline. Renegotiate what, Richard? The company, Richard stammered, his breathing rapid and shallow. The warehouses. The bank just sent the official seizure notices to my email. You actually locked my employees out of the building. You cannot just shut down my entire life overnight. We can fix this. I will make you a managing partner. I will give you 50% of the logistics company. We can run it together. You have the capital to save it, and I have the industry experience. I let out a slow, cold sigh. You cannot offer me a partnership in a company you no longer own, Dad. You do not have any industry experience. You ran your business straight into the ground to pay for Patricia's country club memberships and Vanessa's designer clothes. I already own 100% of your company, and as of this morning, it is being liquidated to pay off the massive debts you owe to external vendors. Your logistics empire is dead. Richard let out a panicked, choking sound. In the background of the call, I could hear Patricia sobbing wildly. Fine, Richard cried, pivoting his desperation to the only thing they had left. Liquidate the company. Take the warehouses. Take the cars. Just leave us the house. Jocelyn, please. You cannot take our home. We have lived here for 20 years. It is all we have. You should have thought about that before you used it as collateral for a business loan you could never repay, I stated evenly. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years, Richard shouted, a sudden desperate anger bleeding back into his voice. We fed you. We clothed you. You owe us the basic human decency of letting us keep our home. You locked me out of that house in the freezing rain when I was 17 years old because I missed my curfew by 10 minutes. I reminded him, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. You sat inside and watched me shiver on the porch until morning to teach me a lesson about respecting your property. There is no human decency left between us. Jocelyn. I am begging you. Richard pleaded, his voice breaking. A team of my real estate agents is walking through the property on Thursday afternoon, I said, completely ignoring his tears. The house will be officially listed on the open market by Friday morning. You have exactly 72 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you are still inside the house on Thursday night, the local authorities will escort you out for trespassing. The line went completely dead quiet. For 5 full seconds, all I could hear was the ragged, heavy sound of my father breathing. He realized that the begging was not going to work. He realized that the guilt-tripping was useless. I was an immovable wall of stone, and I was going to crush them entirely. The desperation vanished. The cornered, vicious animal inside my father finally lashed out. You think you are so smart? Richard snarled, his voice turning dark and laced with pure venom. You think you can just destroy your own family and walk away clean? I will not let you get away with this, Jocelyn. And how exactly do you plan to stop me? I asked. I will go to the media, Richard threatened, his voice rising into a furious, triumphant shout. I will call the New York Times. I will call the financial news networks. I will tell them exactly what kind of ruthless, psychotic corporate raider you really are. I will tell the whole world that the CEO of Aura Estates stole her father's company and threw her own mother out onto the street. I will ruin your pristine reputation in high society. You will be an absolute pariah. No one will ever do business with a monster like you again. I sat in my sunlit office listening to the man who had tormented me my entire life, threaten to destroy my career. I threw my head back and I laughed. I laughed. The sound was not forced or defensive. It was a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the high walls of my corporate office. It was the sound of a woman who had spent 14 years waiting for the monster to show his true face, only to realize he was just a pathetic, powerless shadow. On the other end of the encrypted line, Richard stopped screaming. The line went dead quiet for a second before his breathing grew ragged and heavy. "What is so funny?" Richard demanded. His voice was shaking with confusion and rage. "You think I am bluffing, Jocelyn? I will call the reporters right now. I will tell them you are a monster." I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the rich warmth settle in my chest. "You are not a monster, Richard. You are just predictable. You have spent your entire life relying on intimidation and fake wealth to bully people into submission. But you are playing a game you do not understand against a woman who is already 10 steps ahead of you." I reached across my glass desk and picked up a sleek silver remote control. "Turn on your television, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous calm. "Turn it to the National Morning Financial News Network. Right now, I want you to watch your last pathetic lifeline burn to ashes." "What are you talking about?" Richard stammered. But I could hear the faint click of a television turning on in the background. He was terrified and he was following my orders. I pressed a button on my remote. The massive flat screen mounted on the wall of my office hummed to life. The motorized blinds on my floor-to-ceiling windows automatically shifted to reduce the glare. On the screen, a prominent morning financial news anchor was sitting across a glass table from a very familiar face. It was Lawrence. Devon's father looked immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, radiating the quiet, absolute authority of a billionaire titan of industry. I held the phone close to my ear. "Are you watching, Richard?" I did not wait for his answer. I just let the broadcast speak for itself. The news anchor leaned forward, smiling professionally at Lawrence. "We are thrilled to have you here this morning, Lawrence. The real estate sector has been buzzing with rumors about your firm making a massive strategic move in the luxury hospitality market. Can you confirm the new partnership?" Lawrence offered a charismatic, commanding smile. "I can absolutely confirm it. As of this morning, my firm has officially partnered with Aura Estates to develop a series of exclusive commercial properties across the East Coast." The anchor raised her eyebrows in genuine impression. "Aura Estates. That is a massive acquisition. The CEO of Aura is notoriously private, but incredibly lucrative in her ventures. What drew you to partner with her company?" This was the kill shot. I listened to Richard taking a shaky, terrified breath on the other end of the line as Lawrence looked directly into the news cameras. "I have done business with thousands of executives in my lifetime," Lawrence said, his deep voice carrying absolute conviction on national television. "I have never met a CEO with more integrity, vision, and raw brilliance than Jocelyn. She is a powerhouse in the hospitality industry." The anchor nodded enthusiastically. "She certainly has a reputation for turning distressed properties into gold mines. Can you tell us a bit about her background?" Lawrence steepled his fingers, his expression turning serious and profound. "What makes her success so remarkable is that she built every single inch of her empire completely on her own. She received zero financial backing from her family. In fact, she had to overcome severe personal betrayals early in her life to get to where she is today. She took the absolute worst kind of adversity and turned it into gold. My family and my firm are honored to stand beside a woman of such flawless character." I lowered the volume on my television and spoke directly into the phone receiver. "Did you hear that, Richard?" There was no shouting on the other end of the line. There were no threats. There was only the sound of a completely broken man realizing that his entire existence had just been permanently erased from high society. "You think you can go to the media and ruin my reputation?" I asked, my voice cutting through his silence like a surgical blade. Lawrence just went on national television and publicly endorsed my integrity to the entire financial world. He bulletproofed my reputation. And more importantly, he just fired a massive warning shot to every single person in your social circle. Richard let out a pathetic, suffocated wheeze. Lawrence and Beatrice are the absolute pinnacle of the old money elite. I continued, making sure he understood the sheer magnitude of his ruin. By publicly praising me and referencing the severe personal betrayals I overcame, Lawrence just drew a line in the sand. He subtly signaled to every country club, every board of directors, and every wealthy socialite in this city that my family is toxic. "If you call a reporter right now," I explained, driving the final nail into his coffin, "they will not see a loving father who was wronged. They will see a bitter, bankrupt, estranged man trying to extort an independent, highly respected female CEO. The media will dig into your logistics company. They will expose your massive debt defaults. They will publish the foreclosure notices I filed against your house. You will be a laughingstock." Richard tried to speak, but his voice cracked into a miserable sob. "Jocelyn, please. We have no money. We have nowhere to go. My friends at the club will not even answer my texts this morning." "They are not your friends, Richard. They were networking contacts, and your network is officially dead. Your country club memberships will be revoked by noon because your corporate accounts are frozen. The elite society you and Patricia desperately sacrificed my childhood to impress has completely exiled you. You are socially radioactive." I took one final sip of my espresso. "You have 72 hours to pack your bags and get out of my house," I said with absolute finality. "Do not call this number again." I hung up the phone. I did not wait for his tears or his apologies. The line went completely silent, leaving me alone in my sunlit office, surrounded by the empire I built with my own two hands. 4 days had passed since the engagement dinner imploded. It was Thursday afternoon, exactly 4 hours before the eviction deadline I had given my parents. I was sitting in my corporate headquarters reviewing the final acquisition documents for my father's logistics company when the intercom on my glass desk chimed softly. Felix's voice came through the speaker, crisp and entirely professional. "Boss, your sister is currently in the main lobby. She is demanding to speak with you. Security is asking if they should escort her off the premises." I paused, setting my silver pen down on the blueprints. Vanessa had not contacted me since she lunged across the dining table, trying to claw my eyes out in a blind rage. "Send her up," I replied smoothly. "Let us see what she wants." The heavy oak doors to my office opened a few minutes later. I barely recognized the woman who walked in. Vanessa was no longer the pristine, arrogant golden child who draped herself in designer labels and dripped with unearned wealth. The expensive silk dresses were gone. She was wearing a plain, wrinkled trench coat and a pair of scuffed flat shoes. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and the dark, heavy circles under her eyes told the story of a woman who had not slept a single second in days. Vanessa stood in the center of my massive office. She looked around at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the imported marble floors, and the undeniable proof of my massive success. She looked incredibly small. She looked entirely defeated. "Jocelyn," Vanessa said, her voice raspy and stripped of all its usual entitlement, "I need your help." I leaned back in my leather chair and folded my hands. "You are in my building, Vanessa. What kind of help could you possibly expect from the bitter, jealous monster who ruined your life?" She flinched violently at her own words being thrown back at her. "Please," she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. "I have nothing left." Devin blocked my number before we even made it to the subway station that night. He instructed his building security to turn me away if I showed up. His parents blacklisted me from every charity board and social club in the city. I cannot even get a reservation at a mediocre restaurant without people pointing and whispering about me. And Mom and Dad, I asked, keeping my expression entirely blank. Vanessa let out a dry, broken sob. They are losing their minds. They have been packing boxes nonstop. They found a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city, but they can barely afford the security deposit. And they have completely turned on me. Mom blames me for everything because I stole the money 3 years ago and got exposed in front of Devin. She told me I had to move out today and fend for myself. The irony was absolutely staggering. Patricia was tossing her precious golden child into the street just to save her own skin. I need a job, Vanessa begged, stepping closer and gripping the edge of my glass desk. I have no money. My credit cards are dead. I will do anything, Jocelyn. I will work at the reception desk. I will clean the hotel rooms. Just give me a job at one of your properties so I can pay rent somewhere. I will prove to you that I can work hard. I looked at my younger sister. I remembered the days I would come home smelling like grease from working a double shift at the diner. I remembered how Vanessa would hold her nose laughing at my cheap uniform while she paraded around in clothes paid for with my stolen tuition money. She had spent her entire 20s attending bottomless brunches and shopping on our father's dime while I was bleeding to build an empire. You want to work for Aura Estates? I asked, my tone perfectly level. Yes, Vanessa cried eagerly, a desperate spark of hope lighting up her exhausted face. I will start at the very bottom. I promise I will not cause any trouble. I shook my head slowly. I cannot hire you, Vanessa. I run a multi-million-dollar luxury hospitality empire. I employ the absolute best professionals in the industry. I do not run a rehabilitation center for thieves. Vanessa gasped, her face flushing with fresh burning humiliation. You signed a confession for grand larceny, I reminded her coldly. You stole thousands of dollars from the cash registers of my own club. You breached the most basic level of trust an employer requires. You are a massive liability, and I will not risk my company's flawless reputation just because we happen to share genetics. Vanessa collapsed into one of the guest chairs across from my desk. She buried her face in her hands and wept. It was not a fake theatrical performance designed to manipulate a billionaire into marrying her. It was the raw, ugly weeping of a woman who had finally hit rock bottom. I have absolutely nothing, Vanessa choked out between heavy sobs. I do not have any skills. I do not know how to survive out there. I do not know what to do. I watched her cry for a moment. I felt no urge to comfort her. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out my personal checkbook and a sleek silver pen. I quickly wrote out a check, signed my name at the bottom, and ripped it from the binding. I slid the crisp piece of paper across the smooth glass surface of my desk. It stopped right in front of Vanessa. Vanessa slowly lowered her hands. She sniffled and looked down at the check. Her eyes widened as she read the number printed on the line. $5,000. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of desperate gratitude and deep confusion. She did not understand the significance of the number. I stood up from my chair and looked down at her. This is exactly what I asked Mom and Dad for 12 years ago to start my life. I stated, my voice ringing with absolute unyielding finality. I begged them for a $5,000 loan to open my first business, and they laughed in my face. They told me I was a failure. They told me to figure it out. I gestured toward the check on the glass desk. So I am giving you the exact same opportunity, I said coldly. This is all you get. Figure it out. Vanessa stared at the crisp piece of paper sitting on the glass desk. $5,000. It was a fraction of what she used to spend on a single weekend shopping spree. But right now, it was the only lifeline she had left in the entire world. Her hands shook as she reached out and picked up the check. She did not scream. She did not throw a tantrum. The reality of her absolute ruin had finally broken her spirit. Vanessa looked at me one last time, her eyes completely hollow. She turned around and walked out of my office. I watched the heavy oak doors click shut behind her. That was the last time I ever spoke to my sister. The final toxic tether tying me to my past had been permanently severed. The consequences of that fateful engagement dinner unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated. When the 72-hour eviction deadline arrived, my father Richard and my mother Patricia realized I was not bluffing. My private security team arrived at the suburban mansion right on schedule, accompanied by local authorities to ensure a smooth transition of property. My parents were forced to pack their fabricated high society life into cheap cardboard boxes. They watched my real estate agents hammer a for sale sign into the manicured front lawn. They had no corporate funds to fall back on. They had no wealthy friends willing to lend them a single cent. Lawrence had made sure of that. His live television interview had been the ultimate social death sentence. My parents were completely exiled from the elite circles they had worshipped their entire lives. Richard and Patricia moved into a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. There were no crystal chandeliers. There were no private dining clubs. Richard was forced to take a low-level administrative job at a local shipping facility, answering to managers half his age just to keep the lights on. Patricia lost her country club memberships, her designer wardrobe, and her entire identity. She spends her days sitting in a small linoleum-floored kitchen, completely consumed by the bitter reality that her own arrogance had stripped her of everything she loved. They built their entire marriage on a foundation of fake wealth and cruel manipulation, and now they were trapped in a cage of their own making. As for Vanessa, the golden child learned a very harsh lesson about the value of a dollar. The $5,000 check I gave her evaporated in less than a month. She did not know how to budget. She did not know how to survive without a wealthy benefactor funding her lifestyle. With her reputation destroyed in the corporate world due to her past theft and Devin having blocked her from every elite circle in New York, Vanessa was forced to face the reality of the working class she had once relentlessly mocked. Today, my former golden child sister works a minimum wage retail job at a mid-tier department store. She stands on her feet for 8 long hours a day. She folds the exact same designer clothes she used to buy without ever looking at the price tag. She deals with rude, demanding customers who treat her exactly the way she used to treat the waitstaff at my restaurants. The billionaire lifestyle she had lied and manipulated to secure is nothing but a distant, painful memory. She is finally learning how to figure it out. While their world crumbled into dust, mine expanded into an empire. The partnership between Aura Estates and Lawrence's real estate firm became one of the most lucrative commercial alliances on the East Coast. We launched 3 new ultra-luxury resorts within the first year. But I gained something far more valuable than just a massive expansion of my wealth. I gained a family. Lawrence and Beatrice did not just become my business partners. They became my mentors and my greatest advocates. They welcomed me into their home with genuine warmth and absolute respect. They showed me what true, unconditional support actually looked like. We spent holidays together, sharing meals filled with actual laughter instead of toxic, calculated barbs. Devin moved on, throwing himself into his highly successful venture capital firm and eventually finding a brilliant, honest woman who matched his deep integrity. We all moved forward, leaving the poison of my biological relatives far behind us. Family is not defined by blood or by obligation. Family is defined by the people who stand by you when the fire gets hot. It is defined by the people who value your character over your bank account. 6 months after that chaotic night at the Obsidian Room, I stood on the sprawling balcony of my Manhattan penthouse. The cool evening breeze swept across the terrace as the sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the clouds in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I held a crystal glass of my favorite vintage red wine. I looked out over the glowing grid of streets, the towering skyscrapers, and the vibrant beating heart of the city I had conquered. I thought about the scared 20-year-old girl who had been thrown out of her childhood home with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. I thought about the 14 years of relentless, agonizing hard work. I thought about the moment I placed that $42,000 bill in front of my mother. I took a slow, deep sip of my wine and smiled, a genuine, profound smile of absolute peace. They tried to burn my life to the ground. They tried to bury me in their lies and step on my back to reach the top. But they underestimated who they were dealing with. I did not just survive the fire. I bought the ashes, and I built a castle on top of them. If you are watching this right now and you are dealing with people who constantly belittle your ambitions and try to make you feel small, I want you to remember one thing. Your worth is not dictated by their inability to see it. Keep your head down, do the work, and build your own empire in the silence. Because the best revenge is not destroying them. The best revenge is letting them watch you win. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please leave a comment below and share your own experiences. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and never let anyone tell you that you cannot figure it out. One profound lesson from these stories is that your true value is never determined by a toxic family's inability to recognize it. Just as an abandoned warehouse can secretly be worth millions, or a dismissed career path can lead to a billion-dollar empire. Immense potential often lies exactly where others only see failure. Real success comes from trusting your own vision, working relentlessly, and setting firm boundaries against exploitation. Ultimately, the greatest vindication is simply building a beautiful, authentic life on your own terms. Please share your own stories of overcoming underestimation and comment below.